Chapter 1. A strange visitor. It was during the mild winter of 1887 that my friend Sherlock Holmes became involved in what would later be known as the affair of the Crimson Pagoda. The circumstances surrounding this case were of such a delicate nature, involving several prominent families and foreign dignitaries, that discretion demanded my silence until now. A persistent fog had descended upon London that morning, transforming familiar streets into ghostly passages. I had risen early, my old military habits refusing to abandon me, and found Holmes already seated at our breakfast table, his lean figure hunched over the morning papers. "Ah, Watson," he greeted me without looking up. "I see your shoulder is troubling you again. The damp weather is most disagreeable to old wounds, is it not?" I paused in surprise, my hand unconsciously moving to my left shoulder where the Afghan bullet had found its mark years before. "Holmes, how could you possibly—" "Your movements were stiffer than usual when you entered, and you have been favoring your right arm since you awoke. Elementary, my dear fellow." He folded the newspaper and fixed his penetrating gray eyes upon me. "But perhaps we shall have something to distract us from the weather. Mrs. Hudson informs me that a gentleman was making inquiries about our availability yesterday evening. A man of distinction, judging by his carriage." I was about to reply when the sharp ring of our doorbell interrupted my thoughts. "Ah!" Holmes exclaimed, suddenly alert. "That will be our potential client. His step on the stair is hurried, yet measured. A man accustomed to authority but currently under considerable strain." Indeed, moments later Mrs. Hudson announced a visitor. "Sir William Blackwell wishes to see you, Mr. Holmes. He says it's a matter of grave importance." The name was familiar. Sir William was a distinguished diplomat who had served throughout the Far East. His work in establishing trade relations between Britain and China had earned him considerable acclaim in government circles. Our visitor entered with the confident bearing of one accustomed to navigating diplomatic waters, yet I could detect an undercurrent of agitation in his manner. He was a tall, imposing figure in his early 50s, impeccably dressed, with silver-streaked dark hair and a neatly trimmed beard. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes," he began, his voice carrying the crisp enunciation of a Cambridge education. "I apologize for calling upon you at this early hour, but I find myself in a situation of extreme delicacy and urgency." After introductions, Sir William continued, "The matter concerns my daughter Eliza, and an artifact of great historical and political significance, a relic known as the Crimson Pagoda." At the mention of this object, I noticed a spark of interest illuminate Holmes' previously languid expression. "I am familiar with the legend," Holmes remarked, steepling his fingers. "A jade carving of exceptional antiquity, said to have belonged to the first emperor of China. But I was under the impression that it had been lost during the Second Opium War." Sir William's eyebrows rose in evident surprise. "Your knowledge is impressive, Mr. Holmes." "Yes, that is the common belief, one that my own government has been content to perpetuate. The truth, however, is considerably more complicated." He explained how, during his final year at the British Embassy in Beijing, he had been entrusted with recovering certain artifacts appropriated during the conflict. The Crimson Pagoda was among them, a carving of immeasurable value, not merely for its antiquity, but for what it contained. "A cipher key, Dr. Watson," he revealed when I inquired. "One that, in the wrong hands, could compromise British intelligence operations throughout the Orient for years to come. The pagoda itself is an ingenious puzzle box, designed to reveal its secrets only to those who understand its mechanism. I succeeded in recovering the artifact and bringing it safely to England. For the past 15 years, it has remained secure in my private collection, its true significance known only to a select few within the Foreign Office." Sir William's expression darkened. "Until 3 days ago, when it vanished from my study, along with my daughter." "You believe the two disappearances are connected?" Holmes asked. "I am certain of it. Eliza had recently become engaged to a young man named Richard Thornfield. the son of a merchant with extensive business interests in Hong Kong and Shanghai. Sir William's voice tightened. The morning after the pagoda disappeared, I received this. He handed Holmes a note written in a delicate feminine hand. Father, by the time you read this, I shall be beyond your reach. Richard has shown me the truth about your so-called diplomatic service to the Empire. The Crimson Pagoda belongs to its rightful owners, and I intend to see justice done. Do not attempt to find me, Eliza. It is undoubtedly my daughter's handwriting, Sir William confirmed, but the sentiments expressed are utterly foreign to her nature. Eliza has always been headstrong, Mr. Holmes, but she is a patriot to her core. Something is terribly wrong. Holmes questioned him further, learning that Sir William had last seen his daughter and the pagoda 3 evenings prior when Richard Thornfield had joined them for dinner. The following morning both were gone. Thornfield himself had vanished, his Mayfair lodgings emptied, his club ignorant of his whereabouts. Mr. Holmes, my concern is primarily for my daughter, Sir William said, his diplomatic composure finally cracking. The pagoda, while valuable to national interests, is secondary to her safety. When asked about unusual occurrences preceding the disappearance, Sir William mentioned a Chinese gentleman who had visited a week earlier, claiming to be an associate of Thornfield's father, and leaving a book on Chinese antiquities. He also believed he had been followed several times while walking in St. James's Park. I shall take your case, Holmes declared, his expression animated by the intellectual challenge. The circumstances are unusual enough to warrant my attention. Sir William provided photographs of both Eliza and Richard, along with a sketch of the pagoda. The artifact was smaller than I had imagined, standing only 8 inches tall, but the craftsmanship was extraordinary. Carved from a single piece of blood-red jade, the multi-tiered structure was adorned with minute figures and symbols spiraling around its surface in a complex pattern. Watson, we shall need to visit Sir William's residence today, Holmes announced as our visitor departed. The game is afoot, and we have not a moment to lose. I could see that familiar gleam in Holmes's eye, the one that invariably appeared when a puzzle worthy of his talents presented itself. Little did I know that this case would lead us into a labyrinth of international intrigue, ancient secrets, and mortal danger, a journey that would test even Sherlock Holmes's remarkable faculties to their utmost limit. Chapter 2. The Diplomat's Residence. The fog had thinned somewhat by the time our hansom cab pulled up before Sir William's elegant Belgravia residence, a stately townhouse of white stone set back from the street behind ornate iron railings. As we approached the entrance, I observed Holmes scanning the exterior with his characteristic intensity, his gaze lingering on the windows and the small garden that flanked the steps. "Note the fresh mud on the garden path, Watson," he murmured. "Someone has been examining the perimeter of this house quite recently, and not the regular gardener, judging by the pattern of the footprints. Too narrow for a workman's boot, and the stride is measured, deliberate." We were admitted by an elderly butler whose impassive face betrayed only the slightest concern for the circumstances that had brought us there. He led us through a marble-floored entrance hall adorned with Eastern artifacts, porcelain vases, silk hangings, and carved wooden panels that spoke of Sir William's years abroad. Our host greeted us in his study, a richly appointed room lined with bookshelves and display cases. "Thank you for coming so promptly, gentlemen. I've instructed the staff to provide you with any assistance you require. I'd like to begin by examining the location from which the pagoda was taken," Holmes said, glancing around the study. "This room, I presume?" Sir William nodded. "Yes, it was displayed in that cabinet." He indicated a glass-fronted case positioned between 2 tall windows overlooking the garden. The lock was not forced. Either it was opened with a key, or by someone skilled in such matters. Holmes moved to the cabinet and examined it closely, his magnifying glass hovering over the brass lock. "The key is kept where?" "In my desk drawer, which remains locked when I am absent. I have the only key to that. And who besides yourself has keys to the cabinet? Sir William frowned. No one, officially, though I suppose the household keys, including a duplicate, are kept in the butler's pantry. I see, Holmes continued, his inspection, kneeling to examine the polished wooden floor. The household includes whom, besides yourself and your daughter? Mr. Simmons, the butler who admitted you. Mrs. Pierce, the housekeeper. Cook, 2 maids, and a footman. All have been with me for at least 5 years, except for one of the maids, who joined the household 3 months ago. The new maid, she was recommended by whom? Holmes asked, still studying the floor. By Mrs. Pierce's niece, I believe. I leave such matters to the housekeeper. Sir William appeared puzzled by this line of questioning. Holmes straightened suddenly. I'd like to see Miss Blackwell's room now, if I may. Sir William led us upstairs to a suite of rooms at the rear of the house. Eliza Blackwell's chamber was elegantly appointed, but showed signs of a hasty departure. Drawers left partially open, items on the dressing table disarranged. A portrait on the wall showed a striking young woman with dark hair and her father's determined jawline, though softened by youth and femininity. Nothing appears to have been packed methodically, Holmes observed, opening the wardrobe. Several expensive gowns remain, but practical traveling clothes are missing. The jewelry case has been selectively emptied. Sentimental pieces remain, while items of portable value are gone. He turned to Sir William. Your daughter maintained a diary or journal, perhaps? Yes, she kept a journal faithfully. I've never intruded upon it, of course. Holmes searched the writing desk but found nothing. Taken with her, it seems. Most revealing. He proceeded to examine the room systematically, paying particular attention to the fireplace, where he extracted several partially burned fragments of paper from the ashes. Watson, your pocket magnifier, if you please. Mine is insufficient for this delicate work. I handed him the stronger lens I carried for medical examinations. Holmes studied the charred fragments, then carefully placed them in an envelope. Now tell me more about Richard Thornfield, he said, turning back to Sir William. His family's business. You mentioned connections to Hong Kong and Shanghai? Yes. Thornfield and Sons, importers of silk and porcelain primarily. They've been established in the China trade for 2 generations. Richard is the eldest son, educated at Oxford, and by all appearances, a gentleman. I had no obvious reason to object to his courtship of Eliza. Yet you had reservations? Sir William hesitated. Nothing I could articulate clearly. Perhaps it was merely a father's natural caution, or perhaps... He frowned. There were occasions when I observed a certain calculation in his manner, a coldness beneath the charm. How did they meet? At Lady Harrington's musical evening some 4 months ago, Richard was introduced by the Harrington's son, who knew him from university. Holmes nodded thoughtfully. I should like to speak with the servants, beginning with the new maid and the butler. The interviews yielded little of obvious significance. The maid, a nervous young woman named Jenny, had been in service for only 3 months and knew nothing of Miss Blackwell's private affairs. The butler, while clearly devoted to Sir William, could provide no insights beyond confirming that Mr. Thornfield had visited frequently over the past months, and that Miss Blackwell had seemed in good spirits until her disappearance. One last question, Holmes said to the butler. The Chinese gentleman who called recently, can you describe him? A distinguished man, sir. Middle-aged, very formal in his manner. He wore European clothes but spoke with a slight accent. He gave his name as Mr. Chang. After the butler withdrew, Holmes turned to Sir William. I need to examine any correspondence between your daughter and Thornfield, as well as any documents relating to your acquisition of the Crimson Pagoda. The latter are in my Foreign Office files, most of which are confidential. Then we shall require the assistance of your former colleagues. This matter has implications beyond a domestic disappearance, Sir William. I strongly suspect we are dealing with a carefully orchestrated plan that has been months, perhaps years, in the making. As we prepared to leave, Holmes paused in the entrance hall, his attention caught by a small lacquered box on a side table. He opened it to reveal several calling cards. "Ah," he said softly, removing one. "Most illuminating." Outside, as we hailed a cab, I asked what he had discovered. "Several things of note, Watson. The absence of forced entry, the selective nature of what was taken, the burned fragments in the fireplace, which I believe are parts of diplomatic communications. And this." He showed me the calling card he had pocketed. It bore the name Professor James Moriarty in elegant script. Moriarty? But what connection could he have to this affair? Holmes' expression was grave. "That, my dear Watson, is what concerns me most. If Moriarty is involved, then what appeared to be a theft motivated by political ideology or romance may be something far more sinister. We must proceed with extreme caution." As our cab rattled through the London streets toward our next destination, I sensed that the affair of the Crimson Pagoda had depths we had only begun to fathom, depths from which even Sherlock Holmes might struggle to surface unscathed. Chapter 3. A Web of Connections. Our cab took us to Thornfield & Sons, a handsome establishment in the commercial district near the docks. The facade was imposing, polished stone and brass fittings that spoke of substantial prosperity, with large, display windows exhibiting exquisite Chinese porcelain and silks. A discreet plaque beside the entrance indicated that the firm had been established in 1842, the year of the Treaty of Nanking that had opened 5 Chinese ports to British trade. "Observe, Watson," Holmes murmured as we approached, "the freshly painted trim around the windows. Recent renovations, yet the business appears quiet. Barely a customer inside. One might wonder about the source of their apparent prosperity." Inside, we were greeted by a thin, elderly clerk, who eyed us with barely concealed suspicion. When Holmes inquired about Richard Thornfield, the man's expression grew guarded. "Mr. Richard is away on business, sir. I cannot say when he might return." "Perhaps Mr. Thornfield Sr. could assist us?" Holmes pressed. "Mr. Edward Thornfield sailed for Hong Kong 3 weeks ago," the clerk replied stiffly. "I am authorized to manage correspondence, but I cannot discuss family matters." Holmes handed the man his card. "I am investigating a matter of some delicacy involving Mr. Richard Thornfield. It would be preferable to handle this discreetly, rather than through official channels." The mention of official channels produced a visible effect. The clerk hesitated, then said in a lowered voice, "Mr. Richard cleared out his office 2 days ago. He mentioned an urgent voyage, but left no forwarding address." He glanced toward a door at the rear of the showroom. "His office is through there, but there's nothing left to see." Despite this disclaimer, Holmes insisted on examining the space. The office was indeed largely emptied, desk drawers standing open, filing cabinets cleared of their contents. Only a few business papers remained, deemed too insignificant to warrant removal. As Holmes inspected the room, I noticed a peculiar bas-relief carving on the wall. A dragon coiled around what appeared to be a pagoda. "Holmes," I said quietly, drawing his attention to it. He examined the carving closely. "Interesting," he remarked. "Not merely decorative, I think." His slender fingers pressed lightly against different points of the carving until, with a soft click, a small compartment opened in the wall behind it. The hidden space was empty, save for a single sheet of paper bearing a series of Chinese characters, arranged in columns. "Most illuminating," Holmes said, carefully folding the paper and placing it in his pocket. "I believe we have seen enough here, Watson." Outside, Holmes hailed another cab. "To the Foreign Office," he instructed the driver. "Do you read Chinese, Holmes?" I asked, as we settled into our seats. "Only a rudimentary knowledge," he admitted, "but sufficient to recognize that this is not a standard communication. The characters are arranged in a specific pattern, likely a code that relates to the Crimson Pagoda itself. At the Foreign Office, we were received by Sir George Lambert, a senior official who had worked with Sir William Blackwell in China. Initially reluctant to discuss confidential matters, he became more forthcoming when Holmes produced the document. "We had discovered." "Good heavens!" Sir George exclaimed, studying the paper through his pince-nez. "This appears to be a variant of the diplomatic code used by our agents in Beijing 15 years ago. A code that should have been known only to a handful of officials." "Including whom?" Holmes asked sharply. "Sir William, myself, Lord Hartwood, and perhaps 2 others, all men of unimpeachable character." "And what of this Professor Moriarty? Would his name be familiar to your department?" Sir George's face darkened. "Moriarty? Yes, unfortunately. He was briefly engaged as a mathematical consultant to develop encryption methods for diplomatic communications before certain irregularities came to light. He was quietly dismissed some 12 years ago. So he would have been familiar with the coding systems used for Far Eastern communications," Holmes pressed. "Potentially, yes, though the specific key for the China desk should have remained secure." Sir George frowned. "You believe this professor is involved in the theft of the Crimson Pagoda?" "I believe he may be the architect of a scheme far more complex than a simple theft," Holmes replied. "Tell me, do your records indicate any reason why Chinese agents might be particularly interested in recovering this artifact?" Sir George seemed to struggle with whether to reveal classified information. Finally, he sighed. "The pagoda contains more than a cipher key, Mr. Holmes. According to intelligence gathered during the Opium Wars, it also conceals the location of a cache of imperial treasures, gold and jewels hidden by court officials before the fall of Beijing to Western forces. The Chinese government has been quietly searching for it ever since." Holmes nodded thoughtfully. "One final question. Has there been any recent diplomatic pressure from the Chinese regarding the return of artifacts?" "As a matter of fact, yes. A new envoy arrived in London just last month. A most persistent gentleman who has raised the issue in several official meetings." As we left the Foreign Office, Holmes was unusually quiet, his brow furrowed in concentration. It was only when we were seated in a hansom cab bound for Baker Street that he spoke. "We face a formidable adversary, Watson. Moriarty's involvement suggests that this is not merely about returning a cultural artifact to its homeland, nor even about compromising British intelligence. The professor's interests are invariably financial at their core. You believe he seeks, the imperial treasure? It would align with his methods, using others as pawns while he remains safely in the background." Holmes tapped his fingers against his knee. "Richard Thornfield is almost certainly an agent, willing or otherwise, in Moriarty's scheme. The question is whether Miss Blackwell is a collaborator or a victim." Back at Baker Street, Holmes immediately dispatched several telegrams to his network of informants. As evening fell, he settled into his armchair with his pipe, surrounded by a cloud of blue smoke. "I fear we have little time, Watson," he said at last. "If my suspicions are correct, Thornfield and his associates will be attempting to leave England, with both the girl and the artifact. We must determine their likely route and method of escape." Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. Moments later, Mrs. Hudson appeared with a telegram for Holmes. He tore it open, read it swiftly, and leapt to his feet. "Come, Watson, there's not a moment to lose. The game takes a dangerous turn." Chapter 4. The Chinese Emissary. "Bring your revolver, Watson," Holmes called over his shoulder as he bounded down the stairs. "We may have need of it before the night is through." Outside, a cab already waited, testament to Holmes's foresight in arranging transportation. As we climbed in, he thrust the telegram toward me. It read simply, "Chinese diplomatic party boarding vessel at Tilbury. Midnight. Eastern Star. Wiggins." "Wiggins is one of your Baker Street irregulars, is he not?" I asked, checking my revolver before placing it in my coat pocket. "Indeed. I set the boys to watch the Chinese embassy after our visit to the Foreign Office. Their observations rarely disappoint. Holmes leaned forward, instructing the driver, "Tilbury Docks, and there's an extra sovereign if you get us there before 11." The journey to the docks took us through progressively darker and less reputable quarters of London. The fog had returned with a vengeance, wrapping the city in a damp shroud that diffused the gaslights into ghostly halos. Holmes sat in silence for much of the journey, his hawk-like profile occasionally illuminated by the passing lamps. "You believe Miss Blackwell and the Pagoda will be aboard this vessel?" I ventured at last. "It seems the most likely next move," Holmes replied. "The Eastern Star is a merchant vessel bound for Shanghai with diplomatic clearance, meaning its cargo would not be subject to the usual customs inspection. An ideal conveyance for both a reluctant passenger and a stolen artifact. But surely a diplomatic vessel would not involve itself in criminal activities." Holmes gave a dry chuckle. "My dear Watson, the line between diplomacy and espionage has always been perilously thin. I suspect our Chinese emissary may be serving two masters, his government and Professor Moriarty, whose web extends into surprising corners of international affairs." We reached Tilbury shortly before 11. The docks were a maze of warehouses, cranes, and vessels of all descriptions, most shrouded in darkness, save for the occasional swinging lantern of a night watchman. Holmes led us unerringly toward a secluded wharf where a sleek steamship was moored, its funnel issuing lazy wisps of smoke into the night air. The name Eastern Star was just visible on its hull. "We must proceed with caution," Holmes whispered as we concealed ourselves behind a stack of crates. "If Miss Blackwell is indeed aboard, she may be there under duress. If Thornfield is present, he will certainly be armed. And your plan? First, to observe. Then, to act decisively when the moment presents itself." Holmes pointed toward the gangway, where two figures had appeared. A ship's officer conversing with a tall Chinese man in Western dress. "That, unless I'm much mistaken, is our diplomatic friend, Mr. Chang." We watched as several trunks and cases were carried aboard under Mr. Chang's supervision. Then, just as the ship's bell struck the half-hour, a closed carriage arrived at the dock. From it emerged three figures. A slim woman in a dark cloak, who could only be Eliza Blackwell. A tall, fair-haired young man, who matched the photograph of Richard Thornfield. And a third man, older and distinguished in bearing. The third man, Holmes breathed. Not Moriarty himself, but certainly one of his lieutenants, Colonel Sebastian Moran, if I'm not mistaken. Miss Blackwell appeared to move without restraint, yet there was a stiffness to her posture that suggested either reluctance or fear. As the party approached the gangway, Holmes touched my arm. "Wait here. I must get closer. If I raise my hand above my head, come quickly. Otherwise, remain hidden no matter what occurs." Before I could protest, Holmes had slipped away into the shadows. I lost sight of him almost immediately, his dark coat merging with the night. Keeping my gaze fixed on the gangway, I saw Mr. Chang bow formally to the newcomers. Words were exchanged, though I was too distant to hear them. Then, to my surprise, an argument seemed to develop between Thornfield and Moran, with Miss Blackwell standing rigidly between them. The disagreement grew heated. Moran gestured emphatically toward the ship, while Thornfield shook his head. Miss Blackwell suddenly spoke, her words causing both men to turn toward her. It was at that moment that I glimpsed a figure moving silently along the ship's rail, Holmes having somehow managed to board the vessel undetected. What happened next occurred with bewildering speed. Moran reached inside his coat and produced a small pistol. Thornfield lunged forward. Miss Blackwell screamed, and from above, Holmes dropped directly onto Moran, sending them both crashing to the dock. The pistol discharged with a sharp crack, the bullet splintering the wooden planks. I rushed forward, revolver drawn. Thornfield had pulled Miss Blackwell behind him protectively. Not the action of a kidnapper, I noted with confusion. Mr. Chang stood frozen, his diplomatic composure shattered by the sudden violence. Holmes and Moran grappled fiercely, rolling dangerously close to the edge of the dock. Despite his lean frame, my friend was a formidable boxer and wrestler, but Moran possessed the ruthless strength of a born predator. I dared not fire for fear of hitting Holmes. "The case!" Holmes shouted between blows. "Secure the red lacquer case!" Only then did I notice a small red case that had fallen during the struggle, now lying exposed on the dock. As I moved toward it, Mr. Chang suddenly darted forward with surprising agility. I raised my revolver, but Thornfield was faster, tackling the diplomat before he could reach the case. The commotion had attracted attention. Shouts echoed across the dock as night watchmen and sailors ran toward us. Moran, seeing his position becoming untenable, delivered a vicious blow to Holmes's temple that momentarily stunned him, then broke free and raced toward the shadows. "Let him go," Holmes called, staggering to his feet. "We have what matters most." I helped Holmes up while keeping my revolver trained on Thornfield, who still stood protectively beside Miss Blackwell. To my surprise, she did not appear frightened of him, but rather clung to his arm. "I believe, Watson," Holmes said, pressing a handkerchief to his bleeding temple, "that the situation is not precisely what we had surmised." The sound of police whistles drew nearer. Holmes quickly gathered up the red lacquer case. "Come," he said to Thornfield and Miss Blackwell. "We have much to discuss, and not here. The game is far from finished." Chapter 5. Revelations. By firelight, Holmes directed our peculiar party to a small inn near the docks, a modest establishment called the Mariner's Rest, where the proprietor greeted him with the deference reserved for valued patrons. Without question, we were shown to a private parlor with a crackling fire that offered welcome respite from the damp night air. Once the door was closed and Holmes had satisfied himself that we would not be disturbed, he turned to our companions. Eliza Blackwell was a striking young woman, her dark eyes revealing both intelligence and determination. Up close, Richard Thornfield cut a less imposing figure than I had imagined. Scholarly rather than dashing, with sensitive features and wire-rimmed spectacles that gave him the appearance of an academic rather than a spy. "Before we begin," Holmes said, placing the red lacquer case carefully on a side table, "I should inform you, Miss Blackwell, that your father is frantic with worry. A telegram assuring him of your safety would not be amiss." The young woman flushed. "I never intended to cause him such distress, Mr. Holmes, but circumstances forced a hasty departure." "Indeed?" Holmes seated himself, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Perhaps you would be good enough to illuminate those circumstances." Thornfield and Miss Blackwell exchanged glances. It was she who spoke first. "My father has told you about the Crimson Pagoda, I presume?" Holmes nodded. "A jade carving containing a cipher key to British intelligence operations and, if certain sources are to be believed, the location of an imperial Chinese treasure. What he likely did not tell you," Thornfield interjected, "is that the pagoda was never rightfully his to possess." "Richard?" Miss Blackwell warned, laying a hand on his arm. "No, Eliza. If we are to trust Mr. Holmes, there can be no half-truths." Thornfield turned to face us squarely. "The Crimson Pagoda was entrusted to Sir William by my father, Edward Thornfield, for safekeeping during a period of political unrest. It was never intended as a permanent transfer." "Your father," Holmes said thoughtfully, "who is now conveniently in Hong Kong." "Yes, though not for the reasons you might suspect. He returned to protect our family's interests there. Interests that have been threatened by the very man you encountered tonight, Colonel Moran." "Precisely." Thornfield removed his spectacles and polished them nervously. 6 months ago, a man presenting himself as a professor of mathematics approached my father with a proposition. He claimed to represent certain officials in the Chinese government who wished to recover cultural artifacts taken during the Opium Wars. His particular interest was the Crimson Pagoda. Moriarty, Holmes murmured. The same. When my father declined, subtle threats began. Our warehouses in Shanghai suffered a mysterious fire. A trusted employee disappeared. Then my father received a message suggesting that his son in London might meet with a similar misfortune. So your father sailed for Hong Kong to confront this threat directly, I surmised, while instructing me to recover the pagoda before Moriarty's agents could. He believed it would be safer in Chinese hands than as a pawn in Moriarty's schemes. Thornfield glanced at Miss Blackwell. I had already met Eliza by then, though I had no idea of her connection to the pagoda. It was my father who made the connection, Eliza continued. He invited Richard to our home, observed his reaction to our collection. After that, he began asking pointed questions about the Thornfield family business. Sir William suspected. You of being a spy, Holmes stated matter-of-factly. Yes, though the irony is that my intentions were more honorable than his own possession of the artifact. Thornfield's tone held no accusation, merely a statement of fact. When I realized the pagoda was in Sir William's collection, I faced a difficult choice. You chose to confide in Miss Blackwell. The young woman nodded. Richard told me everything. His father's history with the pagoda, Professor Moriarty's threats. When I confronted my father, he admitted that the circumstances of his acquisition were ambiguous. But he refused to return it, Holmes prompted. He insisted that matters of national security outweighed questions of rightful ownership. Her expression hardened. When I pressed him, he forbade me from seeing Richard again and threatened to have the Thornfield business investigated for opium smuggling, a false accusation that would nonetheless destroy their reputation. So you took matters into your own hands, I said, finally understanding their flight. We planned to return the pagoda to the legitimate Chinese authorities, then travel to Hong Kong to join Richard's father. Miss Blackwell's voice wavered slightly. I left the note hoping to buy us time, but I never imagined my father would engage the services of Sherlock Holmes. Holmes had been listening with intense concentration. Now he rose and moved to the lacquer case. May I? Thornfield nodded. Holmes opened the case carefully, revealing the Crimson Pagoda nestled in velvet. Even in the flickering firelight, the artistry of the piece was breathtaking. Deep red jade carved with exquisite precision into a multi-tiered pagoda, tiny figures ascending its staircases, and delicate calligraphy etched along its base. Remarkable, Holmes murmured, lifting it gently. And this contains both a cipher key and a map to treasure. So the legend claims, Thornfield replied, though the mechanism to reveal either is known to very few, including Professor Moriarty, it would seem. Holmes carefully manipulated the tiny figures on the pagoda's surface. And your plan was to board the Eastern Star tonight, with diplomatic assistance from Mr. Chang? Yes. He represents those in the Chinese government who wish the artifact returned without incident. But when we arrived at the docks, Colonel Moran was waiting. He demanded we hand over the pagoda directly to him, which you refused. Richard insisted we maintain our original plan, Eliza said, her admiration evident. That's when Colonel Moran drew his weapon. Holmes replaced the pagoda in its case with reverent care. A fascinating account, but one that leaves certain questions unanswered. His penetrating gaze moved between our two guests. For instance, how did Mr. Chang come to be involved? And why did Moriarty not simply steal the pagoda himself, rather than this elaborate scheme involving you both? Before either could respond, a sharp crack echoed from outside, the unmistakable sound of a gunshot. In an instant, Holmes had extinguished the lamp, plunging the room into darkness broken only by the glow of the fire. It seems, he whispered, that our conversation has attracted unwelcome attention. The game grows more dangerous by the hour. Chapter 6. A Midnight Escape. Stay away from the windows, Holmes whispered, drawing his revolver. In the dying firelight, his hawk-like profile was taut with concentration. "Watson, guard Miss Blackwell." "Mr. Thornfield, the case, if you please." Thornfield clutched the lacquer case to his chest. I moved to Miss Blackwell's side, my own revolver ready, as Holmes crept to the window and peered cautiously through a gap in the curtains. "2 men at the front entrance," he murmured, "and likely more covering the rear. Moran works with thoroughness, if nothing else." "Is there no other way out?" Eliza asked, her voice admirably steady despite the circumstances. Holmes turned from the window. "The landlord is an old ally. There's a reason I chose this particular establishment." He moved to the fireplace and pressed a section of the wooden paneling beside it. With a soft click, a portion of the wall swung inward, revealing a narrow passage. "An artifact from smuggling days. It leads to the river." "What of the pagoda?" Thornfield asked. "If Moran's men are watching the inn, they expect us to have it," Holmes finished, "which is why we must separate. Watson, you will escort Miss Blackwell and Mr. Thornfield through the passage. Make your way to my brother Mycroft's residence in Pall Mall. He is aware of the situation and will provide safe harbor." "And you, Holmes?" I asked, already suspecting his answer. "I shall create a diversion, drawing them away from your escape route." He held out his hand for the lacquer case. "The pagoda, Mr. Thornfield." Thornfield hesitated only briefly before handing over the case. "You understand its value?" "Both monetary and symbolic, yes." Holmes tucked the case under his arm. "Now go, quickly. We have little time." As Holmes guided us to the hidden passage, heavy footsteps sounded in the corridor outside our room. A gruff voice demanded entry. Holmes gestured urgently for us to proceed, then whispered, "Wait for my signal before making for the river. You'll know it when it comes." The passage was damp and narrow, barely wide enough for us to proceed in single file. Miss Blackwell went first, then Thornfield, with me bringing up the rear. The walls were slick with moisture, the floor uneven beneath our feet. Behind us, I heard the door of our room being forced open, followed by angry shouts. We emerged into a small stone chamber with a low ceiling. A rusted iron ladder led down to what I presumed was the riverbank. Through a tiny grating high in the wall came the sounds of commotion from the inn, furniture being overturned, the landlord's protests, Holmes's voice raised in apparent outrage. "We should wait for his signal," I whispered, though every instinct urged immediate flight. A tense minute passed, then another. Miss Blackwell stood resolute, though I could see the strain in her face. Thornfield placed a protective arm around her shoulders. Then came a tremendous crash from the direction of the inn, followed by shouts and the unmistakable sound of breaking glass. A moment later, a brilliant flash illuminated the night sky through our small grating. "Holmes's signal," I said. "Quickly now." We descended the ladder and found ourselves on a narrow strip of shingle beside the Thames. The tide was low, exposing malodorous mudflats, but providing us with a path along the riverbank. Above us, the inn blazed with light, and dark figures could be seen running toward the street, drawn by whatever diversion Holmes had engineered. "This way," I urged, leading them south along the water's edge. We moved as swiftly as the treacherous footing would allow, staying close to the shadow of the embankment wall. "Do you think Mr. Holmes escaped?" Eliza asked breathlessly as we hurried along. "If anyone could elude Moran's men, it would be Holmes," I assured her, though my own concern was mounting. I had witnessed my friend's remarkable abilities many times, but Moran was a formidable adversary, a crack shot with the cunning of a jungle predator. We had covered perhaps half a mile when the sound of pursuing footsteps reached us. Glancing back, I saw 2 figures silhouetted against the distant lights of the dock. "We've been spotted," Thornfield warned. "They're gaining on us." I scanned our surroundings desperately. Ahead, a small pier jutted into the river, and beside it bobbed several rowboats, night fishermen's craft most likely. "The boats," I decided. It's our best chance." We made for the pier, our feet slipping on the wet stones. Behind us, our pursuers had broken into a run. As we reached the pier, a shout went up, followed by the crack of a pistol. The bullet splintered the wooden planking near Miss Blackwell's feet. "Get in," I commanded, helping her into the nearest boat while Thornfield worked frantically to untie the mooring rope. Another shot rang out, dangerously close. I turned and fired 2 shots in rapid succession toward our pursuers. The muzzle flash temporarily blinded me, but I heard a cry of pain that suggested at least one bullet had found its mark. "The rope is stuck," Thornfield grunted, struggling with a knot swollen by river water. Taking my pocket knife, I slashed through the rope just as our pursuers reached the edge of the pier. The current immediately began to carry us away from the shore. I fired once more to discourage any thought of swimming after us, then fell back into the boat, breathing heavily. "Can either of you row?" I asked. Thornfield took up the oars without comment and began to pull us steadily downstream. Miss Blackwell, composed despite our narrow escape, was scanning the shoreline. "Are we still heading for Pall Mall?" she asked. "It would be safest," I confirmed, "though we'll need to land and find a cab once we're well away from here." "And Mr. Holmes? Will he meet us there?" I hesitated. "If he is able." We drifted in silence for several minutes, the oars creaking rhythmically as Thornfield rowed. The mist rising from the river shrouded us, offering welcome concealment. Eventually, the sounds of pursuit faded entirely. As we approached a small public landing, I spotted a familiar tall figure waiting in the shadows. Holmes, his coat collar turned up against the night air, the red lacquer case still tucked securely under his arm. "Holmes," I called softly as we drew near. "Thank God you're safe." "A simple matter of anticipating Moran's tactics," he replied, helping to secure our boat. I knew he would split his forces between front and rear, leaving the river approach vulnerable. He nodded approvingly at our mode of escape. "Well done, Watson. You've led our friends to safety with your usual military efficiency." "What was your diversion?" Thornfield asked as we disembarked. A rare smile flickered across Holmes's face. "A small chemical reaction producing considerable smoke and light. The landlord will add it to my account." His expression grew serious once more. "But we haven't a moment to lose. Moran is not easily deterred, and I fear we face a danger greater than mere pursuit." Chapter 7. The Spider's Web Mycroft. Holmes's residence in Pall Mall was the very picture of discreet elegance. A well-appointed set of rooms in a building that housed several government offices of ambiguous purpose. Despite the late hour, we were admitted immediately by a taciturn manservant who showed no surprise at our disheveled appearance. Sherlock's elder brother awaited us in a spacious study lined with bookshelves and maps. Mycroft Holmes was a substantially larger man than Sherlock, with the same penetrating gray eyes but a more sedentary disposition. He rose ponderously from behind his desk as we entered. "Brother mine," he greeted Sherlock, "your telegram suggested urgency, but your appearance confirms it. I see you've had another of your riverside adventures." "Necessity rather than preference, Mycroft," Sherlock replied, carefully placing the lacquer case on the desk. "May I present Miss Eliza Blackwell and Mr. Richard Thornfield? And you know, Dr. Watson, of course." Mycroft nodded to each of us in turn. "Refreshments have been prepared. I suggest you avail yourselves while we discuss this matter of the Crimson Pagoda." I was not surprised that Mycroft was already familiar with the object of our quest. His position in the government, never precisely defined to me but clearly one of considerable influence, gave him access to information that few in England possessed. Once we had been provided with tea and sandwiches, most welcome after our exertions, Mycroft settled back into his chair, fingers forming a steeple reminiscent of his brother's habitual pose. "The situation, as I understand it," he began, "involves a jade artifact of Chinese origin, containing both a cipher key to British intelligence operations and possibly the location of an imperial treasure. This artifact is currently being pursued by no fewer than 3 parties: the Chinese government, represented by an emissary named Chang, Professor Moriarty, operating through Colonel Moran, and Sir William Blackwell, who believes the object was stolen by his daughter and her fiancé. His gaze settled on Eliza and Thornfield. Though I gather the actual circumstances are more nuanced. As I've explained to your brother, Thornfield said, the pagoda was entrusted to Sir William by my father for safekeeping. We intended to return it to legitimate Chinese authorities. A commendable aim, Mycroft responded, but one that fails to account for certain complexities. The cipher key contained within the pagoda is still of considerable value to British intelligence, despite its age. Its compromise would necessitate the restructuring of our entire Far Eastern network. Surely the Chinese already possess the cipher, I suggested. It originated with them, after all. The original cipher, yes, but Sir William modified it during his tenure, creating a hybrid system known only to a select few in the Foreign Office. Mycroft's gaze shifted to his brother. And it seems to Professor Moriarty, who helped design certain mathematical aspects of the code before his departure from government service. Sherlock nodded gravely. Which explains his particular interest. With the pagoda in his possession, Moriarty could sell British intelligence secrets to the highest bidder, be it China, Russia, or any other interested power. And if the rumors of treasure are true, Mycroft added, the financial incentive is substantial. Miss Blackwell, who had been listening intently, leaned forward. But what of Mr. Chang? If he truly represents the Chinese government? That, Sherlock interrupted, is the question that has troubled me from the beginning. Mr. Chang's credentials appear impeccable, yet his behavior has been inconsistent with a purely diplomatic mission. He turned to his brother. Mycroft, what do your sources say about the current Chinese diplomatic delegation? The official envoy is Ambassador Liu, who arrived 3 months ago. His staff includes several attachés, but none named Chang. Mycroft's expression was somber. However, our intelligence suggests that a faction within the Chinese government has dispatched unauthorized agents to recover artifacts with cultural and historical significance. So Chang could be legitimate, but operating outside official channels, Thornfield surmised. Or, Sherlock countered, he could be another of Moriarty's pieces on the board, positioned to gain your trust and ultimately deliver the pagoda to his true master. A heavy silence fell over the room as we all contemplated this possibility. The fire crackled in the grate, casting long shadows across the Persian carpet. We must test this theory, Sherlock said finally. Mycroft, can you arrange a meeting with Ambassador Liu, quietly and without going through official Foreign Office channels? It can be done, though it will take some hours to arrange. Dawn, at the earliest. That will have to suffice. Sherlock rose and began to pace, his energy undiminished despite our ordeal. In the meantime, I need to examine the pagoda more thoroughly. If we are to understand Moriarty's plan, we must first understand the artifact. At its center, he opened the lacquer case and carefully removed the Crimson Pagoda. In the warm lamplight of Mycroft's study, the blood-red jade seemed to glow from within, its intricate carvings casting miniature shadows across its tiered surfaces. Remarkable craftsmanship, Mycroft observed. Qin dynasty, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, though the puzzle mechanism was added later. Ming era, judging by the stylistic elements. Sherlock's fingers traced the tiny figures that adorned the pagoda's base. The key to its operation must lie in these figures. Each one appears to be positioned at a specific point in what seems a random pattern, yet nothing in such an object would be left to chance. The dragon, Thornfield suggested, pointing to a sinuous figure that wound around the lowest tier. In Chinese mythology, dragons are often guardians of treasure. Sherlock nodded, his attention fixed on the carving as he carefully manipulated the dragon figure. For several minutes he worked in silence, occasionally murmuring to himself. We watched, transfixed, as his deft fingers pressed, turned, and slid various elements of the pagoda. Suddenly there was a faint click, and the top tier of the pagoda rotated slightly. A thin drawer, no wider than a pencil, slid out from the base. "Ah," Sherlock breathed, delicately extracting a tightly rolled piece of silk paper from the drawer. He unrolled it carefully on Mycroft's desk, revealing rows of Chinese characters interspersed with Western numerals. "The cipher key," Mycroft confirmed, studying the document through his pince-nez. "Only half of the puzzle," Sherlock corrected. "The treasure map remains hidden within the pagoda, and unless I miss my guess, its extraction requires a different sequence altogether." As he returned his attention to the jade carving, a soft knock sounded at the door. Mycroft's manservant entered bearing a silver salver with a telegram. "For Mr. Sherlock Holmes," he announced. "Delivered by special messenger just now." Sherlock took the telegram and read it swiftly, his expression darkening. "It seems," he said, "that our adversary has raised the stakes considerably. Sir William Blackwell has been abducted from his home, leaving behind signs of a struggle and this message. The pagoda for the diplomat. Midnight tomorrow. Instructions to follow." Miss Blackwell gasped, her composure finally cracking. "My father!" "But why would Moriarty?" "Because, my dear Miss Blackwell," Sherlock replied grimly, "the professor always ensures he has leverage, and he has just played his strongest card." Chapter 8. The counter-move miss. Blackwell's distress was evident, though she struggled admirably to maintain her composure. "We must meet their demands. My father's life is worth more than any artifact, no matter its significance." A sentiment. "That does you credit," Sherlock said gently, "but one that Moriarty is counting on. He knows we have recovered the cipher key already, yet still demands the pagoda. This suggests the treasure map remains his primary objective. Or perhaps he simply wishes to eliminate all evidence of the cipher," Mycroft suggested. "The Foreign Office would certainly prefer that outcome to its falling into Chinese hands." Thornfield, who had been silent during this exchange, spoke up. "If we surrender the pagoda, what guarantee do we have that Sir William will be released unharmed? Moriarty has already demonstrated he cannot be trusted." "None whatsoever," Sherlock confirmed. "The professor has never been hampered by sentimentality or honor. Once he has what he wants, Sir William becomes a liability rather than an asset." "Then, what are we to do?" Miss Blackwell asked, her voice steady despite her evident fear. Sherlock's eyes gleamed with the intensity I had witnessed so many times before. The look of a master chess player anticipating moves yet to be played. "We shall give Professor Moriarty precisely what he expects. A desperate family willing to trade a national treasure for the life of a loved one." He paused, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "But not quite in the manner he anticipates. For the next hour we engaged in intense strategy. Mycroft dispatched messengers and telegrams, mobilizing his considerable resources within the government. Sherlock, meanwhile, continued his examination of the Crimson Pagoda, working methodically to uncover its remaining secrets. "The cipher key employs a mathematical progression based on the Fibonacci sequence," he explained as his fingers manipulated the tiny figures. "Ingenious in its simplicity, yet impossible to decipher without the physical key provided by these carvings. But the treasure map," he frowned in concentration. "The mechanism is different, more complex. Chinese puzzles often require multiple steps performed in precise order," Thornfield offered. "Indeed." Sherlock carefully rotated the middle tier of the pagoda clockwise, then pressed the tiny figure of a temple guardian. Nothing happened. Not quite right. As dawn approached, Mycroft received word that Ambassador Liu had agreed to an unofficial meeting at a discreet location in Kensington Gardens. "He will see us at 7 o'clock, Mycroft announced. "I suggest we all take some rest before then. Rooms have been prepared." Despite my exhaustion, sleep eluded me. I lay awake, my mind replaying the events of the past 24 hours. The case had grown from the simple theft of an artifact to a complex international conspiracy involving the highest levels of both criminal and governmental circles, and at its center stood Professor Moriarty, the spider in the web, pulling strings from the shadows. I must have dozed eventually, for I was startled awake by Holmes shaking my shoulder. "Up, Watson," he said briskly. "There's not a moment to lose." His expression told me immediately that something had changed. "What is it, Holmes?" "I've solved the puzzle of the pagoda. The treasure map has revealed itself, and it is far more significant than even I had imagined." He held up a second piece of silk paper, covered in Chinese characters and what appeared to be a schematic drawing. "This is why Moriarty wants the pagoda so desperately. It shows not just the location of treasure, but of something potentially far more valuable." We gathered in Mycroft's study, where a light breakfast had been laid out. Despite the early hour, everyone appeared alert. The gravity of our situation overcoming fatigue. "The map," Sherlock explained, spreading the delicate silk on the desk, "indicates a location in the Forbidden City, a hidden chamber beneath the Hall of Supreme Harmony, sealed during the Ming Dynasty. According to these annotations, it contains not only gold and jewels, but also alchemical formulas and weapons designs centuries ahead of their time." "Weapons?" I echoed, alarmed. "Primitive by our standards, perhaps, but revolutionary for their era. And in Moriarty's hands," he left the implication hanging. "The professor has always been interested in advancing the science of warfare," Mycroft observed grimly, "particularly when profit is involved." Our somber reflections were interrupted by the arrival of Mycroft's manservant, bearing a sealed envelope. "Delivered by a street urchin, sir. The boy said it was most urgent." Inside was a sheet of paper containing a message in block capitals: "Pagoda to be delivered to Chinese emissary Chang at Limehouse Dock, Warehouse 7, midnight. Come alone. Any sign of police will result in immediate termination of Sir William." "As expected," Sherlock murmured. Limehouse, the heart of London's Chinese Quarter, a territory where Moriarty's men can operate with relative impunity, and where Mr. Chang would not seem out of place. "We must inform the police," I insisted. "And risk my father's life?" Miss Blackwell protested. "Neither action will be necessary," Sherlock assured her. "By this evening, we shall have a clear understanding of all the players in this drama, and a plan to ensure Sir William's safe return, while keeping the pagoda from Moriarty's grasp." He turned to Mycroft. "The meeting with Ambassador Liu?" "The carriage awaits," Mycroft confirmed, checking his pocket watch. "We should depart immediately to avoid being seen. Miss Blackwell, Mr. Thornfield, you will remain here under Mycroft's protection," Sherlock instructed. "Watson and I shall attend the meeting and return with news." As we traveled toward Kensington Gardens in Mycroft's discreet government carriage, Holmes sat in silence, his brow furrowed in concentration. It was only as we neared our destination that he spoke. "Watson, do you recall our first encounter with Professor Moriarty?" "How could I forget? The Reichenbach Falls." The memory of that terrible day still filled me with dread. "Yes, I believed then that I had rid the world of his malevolence for good." Holmes's expression was somber. "A miscalculation that has allowed his web to spread further than ever before. Today, we have an opportunity to correct that error, but at considerable risk. Whatever your plan, Holmes, you know I stand with you." A rare smile softened his features. "My dear Watson, your loyalty has never been in question, but I fear that before this day is done, that loyalty will be tested as never before." He gazed out at the morning mist that shrouded the park. "For we are about to challenge not just a criminal mastermind, but forces within our own government whose interests may not align with justice." As our carriage slowed near the Lancaster Gate entrance to the gardens, I saw a solitary figure waiting on a bench, a dignified Chinese gentleman in Western dress, his posture erect and alert despite the early hour. "Ambassador Liu," Holmes murmured, "and now we shall discover whether Mr. Chang is friend or foe, and how deep Moriarty's influence truly extends." Chapter 9. Deceptions. Unmasked Ambassador. Liu rose gracefully as we approached, bowing slightly in greeting. He was a slender man in his 50s, with a scholarly demeanor and penetrating dark eyes that missed nothing. "Mr. Holmes," he said in perfect English, "your brother's message suggested a matter of some urgency involving Chinese interests." "Indeed, Ambassador," Holmes replied, "we find ourselves in a delicate situation concerning an artifact known as the Crimson Pagoda." At the mention of the pagoda, a flicker of recognition crossed the diplomat's composed features. We seated ourselves on an adjacent bench, screened from casual observation by a stand of rhododendrons. The early morning mist still hung in the air, ensuring our privacy. "I am familiar with this object," Liu said carefully. "A cultural treasure lost during the unfortunate conflicts of the previous generation. There have been unofficial efforts to secure its return." "Unofficial efforts," Holmes repeated. "Would these include the activities of a man calling himself Mr. Chang?" A subtle change came over the ambassador's expression, a tightening around the eyes that might have gone unnoticed by a less observant man than Sherlock Holmes. "There is no one by that name attached to the official Chinese delegation in London," he stated firmly. "Yet this Mr. Chang claims diplomatic authority and has been working with a young Englishman named Richard Thornfield to return the pagoda to China." The ambassador's gaze sharpened. "Mr. Holmes, I must be frank with you. The imperial government has authorized certain discreet initiatives to recover artifacts of cultural significance. However, these operate through established diplomatic channels, my channels." He leaned forward slightly. "If someone is claiming Chinese authority without my knowledge, they are not acting with the sanction of Beijing." "As I suspected," Holmes murmured. "Tell me, Ambassador, are you aware of a Professor James Moriarty?" Liu's expression darkened. "That name is known to us. 2 years ago, a man using this name approached certain officials with an offer to recover lost treasures for a substantial fee. His proposal was rejected." He paused. "There were rumors that he then approached a faction within the court, those who would prefer more aggressive methods of reclaiming China's heritage." "A rogue operation, then," Holmes concluded, "with potentially serious diplomatic consequences." "Precisely. If these activities became public knowledge, it could damage relations between our nations at a most delicate time." The ambassador's concern was evident. "Mr. Holmes, if you have information regarding the whereabouts of the Crimson Pagoda, I would consider it a personal favor if you would entrust it to me directly. I can ensure its proper return through official channels." Holmes studied the diplomat carefully. "The situation is complicated by a kidnapping. Sir William Blackwell, the current possessor of the artifact, has been taken, presumably by Moriarty's agents. They demand the pagoda in exchange for his life." Liu's expression registered genuine alarm. "This is most disturbing. Sir William is well regarded by my government, despite certain historical disagreements. We have been instructed to deliver the pagoda to this Mr. Chang at midnight, at a warehouse in Limehouse." The ambassador was silent for a moment, considering. "This presents an opportunity to capture those responsible for this unauthorized operation. I could provide discreet assistance. Men who can be trusted implicitly." Holmes nodded slowly. "That would be most helpful, Ambassador. However, there is one more complication you should be aware of." He lowered his voice. "The pagoda contains not only cultural significance, but also information regarding weapons of considerable power." Liu's composure slipped momentarily, confirming Holmes's suspicion that he was already aware of this fact. All the more reason to ensure it does not fall into dangerous hands. As we took our leave of the ambassador, who promised to send trusted men to Mycroft's residence by midday, I could not help but voice my concern. Do you trust him, Holmes? In matters of Chinese national interest, yes. The ambassador's primary concern is preventing scandal and preserving his nation's dignity. He has no reason to align himself with Moriarty. Holmes's expression was thoughtful as we re-entered our carriage. However, there remains the question of who within the Chinese government might be working with our professor. Back at Mycroft's residence, we found our host engaged in intense conversation with a Foreign Office official who departed hurriedly upon our arrival. Progress? Mycroft inquired. The ambassador confirms that Chang is not an official representative, Holmes replied. He has offered assistance for tonight's operation. Speaking of which, Mycroft said, we've received further intelligence. Sir William is being held at a location separate from the exchange point, a precaution we might have anticipated from Moriarty. Miss Blackwell, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped forward. Then even if we deliver the pagoda, my father remains in danger. Precisely why we shall not be making a simple exchange, Holmes assured her. Mycroft, have your people located Moran? Not yet. But we have identified 3 properties in Limehouse with connections to Chinese nationals known to operate outside official channels. Any of them could be holding Sir William. Holmes paced the room, his energy in stark contrast to his brother's sedentary manner. We shall need to investigate all 3 simultaneously. Watson and I will handle the exchange point. Mycroft, your men can monitor the potential holding locations. And what of us? Thornfield asked, indicating himself and Miss Blackwell. You, Mr. Thornfield, will accompany the ambassador's men. Your knowledge of Chinese customs and language may prove invaluable. Holmes turned to Miss Blackwell. As for you, I will not be left behind while my father's life is at stake, she interrupted, her chin raised in determination. Holmes regarded her with unexpected approval. I had no intention of suggesting it. Your presence at a critical moment may prove essential to our plan. The remainder of the day was spent in careful preparation. Holmes worked further with the Crimson Pagoda, eventually extracting a 3rd secret, a small vial of reddish powder concealed within the central pillar. Most interesting, he murmured, examining it carefully. If I'm not mistaken, this contains cinnabar, mercury sulfide. The Chinese alchemists believed it to be an essential ingredient in elixirs of immortality. Poison, in other words, I remarked. Indeed, though its presence here suggests the weapons referenced in the map may involve chemical compounds of considerable potency. He carefully resealed the vial within the pagoda. By evening, our plans were set. Ambassador Liu's men, 4 stoic individuals, with the unmistakable bearing of military training despite their civilian clothes, had arrived and been briefed. Mycroft's agents reported surveillance established at all 3 potential locations where Sir William might be held. As dusk fell over London, Holmes drew me aside. Watson, I must impress upon you the gravity of our situation. Moriarty will have anticipated our reluctance to make a straightforward exchange. He will have contingencies in place. As do we, I reminded him. Yes, but the professor is playing a deeper game than mere extortion. Holmes's expression was unusually grave. I believe he intends to sell the secrets of the pagoda to the highest bidder, be it China, Russia, or others, while using the treasure map to secure his own fortune. Sir William is merely leverage, and we— He paused. We are the obstacles he must eliminate. You believe tonight is a trap? I am certain of it. His eyes gleamed with the familiar light of intellectual challenge. But Moriarty has made one. Critical miscalculation. And what is that? Holmes smiled thinly. He believes we are motivated solely by the desire to save Sir William. He does not understand that we are equally committed to justice, and that sometimes, Watson, the best way to spring a trap is to appear to walk willingly into it. As we prepared to depart for Limehouse, with the Crimson Pagoda secured in its own lacquer case, I could not shake a sense of foreboding. Holmes had faced Moriarty before and had nearly lost his life in the process. Tonight, we would once again match wits with the Napoleon of crime, and the stakes had never been higher. Chapter 10. The Limehouse. Gambit. Limehouse after dark was a different world from the London known to respectable society. A maze of narrow streets and shadowy alleyways, where the smell of the river mingled with exotic spices from the east. Gas lamps cast pools of sickly yellow light at irregular intervals, doing little to dispel the gloom that seemed to cling to the weathered buildings. Holmes and I approached Warehouse 7 on foot, having dismissed our cab several streets away to avoid alerting any watchers. I carried my service revolver in my coat pocket, while Holmes clutched the lacquer case containing the Crimson Pagoda. Miss Blackwell followed several paces behind us, as per Holmes's instructions, her face partially concealed by a hooded cloak. "Remember, Watson," Holmes murmured as we neared our destination. "Timing is everything. When I give the signal, you must act without hesitation." The warehouse loomed before us, a hulking silhouette against the night sky. Its windows were dark, save for a faint glow visible through a ground-floor entrance. As we drew closer, a figure emerged from the shadows, a thin Chinese man in Western clothes, his face impassive. "Mr. Chang, I presume," Holmes said calmly. The man inclined his head slightly. "You have brought what was requested?" "Indeed." Holmes raised the lacquer case. "But first, I must have proof that Sir William is alive and unharmed." Chang's expression remained unreadable. "Follow me. But only you, Mr. Holmes. Your companions will remain outside." "Unacceptable," Holmes replied firmly. "Dr. Watson accompanies me. The lady will wait here." After a moment's hesitation, Chang nodded and led us into the warehouse. The interior was cavernous, filled with stacked crates and the lingering scent of tea and spices. Oil lamps provided minimal illumination, creating more shadows than light. In the center of the open space stood three figures: a bound and gagged Sir William Blackwell, looking disheveled but otherwise unharmed; Colonel Moran, his scarred face instantly recognizable; and a third man whose back was turned to us. "As you can see, Sir William is quite well," Chang said. "Now, the pagoda." Holmes made no move to hand over the case. "A moment, if you please. I find myself curious about certain inconsistencies in this affair." The third man turned slowly to face us. He was of medium height, with a domed forehead and sunken eyes that seemed to bore into one's very soul. Features I had seen before in illustrations accompanying newspaper accounts of sensational trials. "Professor Moriarty," Holmes acknowledged, his voice betraying no surprise. "I thought you might honor us with your presence, Mr. Holmes." Moriarty's voice was soft, yet somehow carried perfectly in the cavernous space. "Always a pleasure to match wits with an intellect approaching my own. Though I must say, your involvement has complicated what should have been a straightforward transaction. Forgive me for interfering with your plans to destabilize British intelligence operations while acquiring ancient weapons technology," Holmes replied dryly. A thin smile crossed Moriarty's face. "You've examined the pagoda thoroughly, then. I expected nothing less, though I suspect even you haven't discerned its full significance." "Perhaps not, but I've learned enough to know it cannot be permitted to fall into your hands." Moriarty's smile faded. "Yet here you stand, pagoda in hand, ready to make the exchange. Your sentimental attachment to human life remains your greatest weakness, Mr. Holmes. And your underestimation of human loyalty remains yours, Professor." Holmes took a step forward. "You miscalculated when you involved Miss Blackwell and Mr. Thornfield in your scheme." "Did I?" Moriarty glanced at Chang. "Mr. Chang, Or should I say, Lieutenant Feng of the Imperial Chinese Secret Service has played his role admirably. As for young Thornfield, his usefulness ended once he led us to the pagoda. At that moment a commotion erupted from outside. Shouts in Chinese, followed by the sound of running feet. Moran's hand moved to his pocket, but Holmes raised a warning finger. "I wouldn't, Colonel. Ambassador Liu's men have the warehouse surrounded, with orders to enter at the first sound of gunfire." Moriarty appeared unperturbed by this development. "A minor inconvenience. There are other exits known only to a few." "And all watched by my brother Mycroft's agents," Holmes countered. "Come now, Professor. You're surrounded. Your deception exposed. The game is over." "Is it?" Moriarty's eyes gleamed. "Did it not occur to you, Mr. Holmes, that I might have anticipated your every move? That this entire scenario might be proceeding exactly as I intended?" He made a subtle gesture, and suddenly additional figures emerged from the shadows behind crates and pillars. At least a dozen men, all armed. Among them was Richard Thornfield, his hands bound behind him, a bruise darkening his left temple. "Mr. Thornfield proved most resilient to persuasion," Moriarty remarked. "But eventually, all men break. He told us of your meeting with Ambassador Liu, your plan to turn the tables on us. Most illuminating." I felt a chill run down my spine. Our carefully constructed plan was unraveling before our eyes. "Now," Moriarty continued, "the pagoda, if you please, or I shall be forced to demonstrate the consequences of defiance on Sir William, and then on young Thornfield." Holmes's expression remained impassive, though I knew him well enough to detect the rapid calculations occurring behind his calm exterior. Slowly, he extended the lacquer case toward Moriarty. "A wise decision," the professor said. Just as his fingers touched the case, the warehouse door burst open. Miss Blackwell stood framed in the entrance, but she was not alone. Beside her stood two figures, one the dignified form of Ambassador Liu, the other a stern-faced man in the uniform of a Scotland Yard inspector. "Professor James Moriarty," the inspector announced. "I am Inspector Bradstreet of Scotland Yard. You are under arrest for the kidnapping of Sir William Blackwell and for conspiracy against the Crown." Moriarty's face contorted with cold fury. "Kill them," he ordered. "Kill them all." What followed was chaos. Moran drew his pistol and fired at Holmes, who dove to one side, the lacquer case clutched protectively to his chest. I pulled my own revolver and returned fire, forcing Moran to take cover. Sir William, despite his bonds, threw himself sideways, toppling the chair to which he was tied. Armed men poured in through every entrance, some in the distinctive uniforms of Scotland Yard, others in the plain clothes of Mycroft's agents, and a third group clearly Chinese in origin, but moving with military precision. "Now, Watson!" Holmes shouted above the din. I knew what I had to do. As gunfire erupted around us, I made my way to Sir William, cutting his bonds with my pocket knife. From the corner of my eye, I saw Holmes engaged in a desperate struggle with Moriarty, the lacquer case lying forgotten on the warehouse floor between them. In the confusion, one figure moved with singular purpose. Chang, or Lieutenant Feng as he had been revealed, darting toward the fallen case. Before I could shout a warning, he had snatched it up and was running toward a side exit. The night's outcome hung in the balance, with freedom, justice, and lives at stake amid the chaos of gunfire and desperate struggle. Chapter 11. Shadows and Light. "The case!" I shouted, pointing toward the fleeing figure of Chang. "He has the pagoda!" Holmes, still locked in combat with Moriarty, called out to the ambassador. "Liu, your man is escaping!" The ambassador barked, a command in Chinese, and two of his men immediately broke away in pursuit. Moriarty used the momentary distraction to land a vicious blow to Holmes's jaw, sending my friend staggering backward. The professor then turned toward the same exit Chang had used, clearly intent on escape. "Stop him!" Inspector Bradstreet commanded. But Moriarty's men had positioned themselves to block pursuit, exchanging gunfire with the police. Recovering quickly, Holmes darted after Moriarty with remarkable agility. I hesitated, torn between following my friend and ensuring Sir William's safety. The diplomat, now freed from his bonds, resolved my dilemma. "Go, Dr. Watson," he urged, his voice hoarse but determined. "I'll see to my daughter." With a nod, I plunged into the maze of crates and shadows after Holmes. The warehouse's rear section opened onto a narrow alley that led toward the Thames. The night air carried the sounds of pursuit, running footsteps, shouts in English and Chinese, and the occasional report of a revolver. I emerged onto a wooden dock jutting into the river, dimly lit by a single gas lamp. The scene before me was one of desperate struggle. Chang stood at the dock's edge, the lacquer case clutched to his chest, engaged in a standoff with the two Chinese agents. Several yards away, Holmes had cornered Moriarty against a stack of crates. "It's over, Professor," Holmes declared, his voice carrying clearly over the lapping of the water. "Your network has been exposed, your men captured." Moriarty's response was chilling in its calm certainty. "Mr. Holmes, you of all people should know that I am never without contingencies." His hand moved toward his waistcoat pocket. Fearing a concealed weapon, I raised my revolver. "Don't move!" But what Moriarty withdrew was not a gun but a small silver whistle. Before either Holmes or I could react, he blew a short, sharp blast. The effect was immediate. From the river, the throb of a steam engine grew louder, and a sleek launch emerged from the darkness, moving swiftly toward the dock. At the same moment, Chang made his move. With a sudden lunge, he knocked aside one of the ambassador's men and tossed the lacquer case toward the approaching boat. It landed on the deck with a thud. Chang himself then dove into the water, swimming powerfully toward the launch. Holmes, seeing Moriarty about to make a similar escape, threw himself forward. The two men grappled at the edge of the dock, teetering dangerously over the dark water below. "Watson!" Holmes called. "The boat!" Understanding instantly, I took aim at the launch's pilot house. My first shot went wide, but the second shattered glass. The vessel swerved erratically, its pilot evidently injured or startled by the gunfire. Instead of drawing alongside the dock, it veered sharply away, leaving Chang struggling in the water. Moriarty, seeing his escape route vanishing, fought with renewed desperation. In the struggle, Holmes's foot slipped on the wet planking. For one heart-stopping moment, I thought history would repeat itself, that Holmes would once again plunge into the depths with his nemesis, as he had at Reichenbach. But this time, I was there. Lunging forward, I seized Holmes's coat just as he and Moriarty fell from the dock. The professor disappeared into the dark waters with a splash, while Holmes dangled precariously from my grip. "Hold on!" I gasped, struggling to maintain my hold. With a supreme effort, I pulled him back to safety, both of us collapsing onto the dock, breathing heavily. "My thanks, Watson," Holmes panted. "It seems I am destined to take unexpected swims with the professor." "Did he escape?" "Possibly. The man possesses an almost supernatural ability to survive." Holmes rose shakily to his feet. "But the pagoda is safely in police custody," came Inspector Bradstreet's voice from behind us. He approached, holding the dripping wet form of Chang by the collar. This one tried to swim after the boat, but one of the ambassador's men fished him out. He gestured toward the river, where the launch was now a distant silhouette, moving rapidly downstream. "We've telegraphed ahead to have river police intercept that vessel." "They'll find it abandoned," Holmes predicted, straightening his sodden clothes. "Moriarty plans meticulously. That boat likely connects to a network of escape routes." We returned to the warehouse to find order largely restored. Moriarty's men had been subdued and handcuffed, while medical attention was being provided to the injured. Sir William stood with his daughter, their reunion evidently emotional, judging by Miss Blackwell's tear-stained face. Thornfield, his bonds removed, was speaking earnestly with Ambassador Liu. "The pagoda?" Sir William asked as we approached. "Lost, I'm afraid," I began, but Holmes interrupted. "Not lost, merely in transit." From inside his coat, my friend withdrew a small object wrapped in a sodden handkerchief. As he unwrapped it, I gasped in astonishment. There lay the Crimson Pagoda, its jade surface gleaming in the lamplight. "But how?" "I saw Chang throw the case into the boat," I stammered. Holmes permitted himself a rare smile of satisfaction. "What you saw, Watson, was precisely what Moriarty and his agents were meant to see." The case contained a replica, skillfully crafted under Mycroft's supervision, to be indistinguishable from the original without close examination. "Then when did you make the switch?" Sir William asked, clearly impressed. "During the initial confusion, when the police entered. A simple matter of misdirection." Holmes carefully handed the pagoda to Ambassador Liu. "I believe, Ambassador, that this belongs in your safekeeping, to be returned to China through proper diplomatic channels." The ambassador received the artifact with reverence. "You have my word, Mr. Holmes, and the gratitude of my government." As we departed the warehouse, dawn was breaking over London, the first pale light reflecting off the Thames. Holmes walked in silence, his expression pensive. "You're thinking of Moriarty," I observed. "Yes. We've disrupted his immediate plans, but he remains at large, a spider temporarily driven from his web, but already spinning new strands of intrigue." Holmes sighed. "And there is still the matter of the cipher key and treasure map. They remain in Mycroft's possession, but their existence poses ongoing risks. At least Sir William and his daughter are reunited, and the pagoda will be returned to its rightful place," I offered. Holmes nodded. "Small victories, Watson, but in our line of work they must suffice." As our cab rattled toward Baker Street, I reflected on the remarkable chain of events that had led us from a missing artifact to an international conspiracy. But one question still nagged at me. "Holmes," I ventured, "what did Moriarty mean when he said even you hadn't discerned the pagoda's full significance?" My friend's expression grew thoughtful. "That, my dear Watson, is a question that may require another investigation entirely. The Crimson Pagoda has guarded its secrets for centuries. I suspect we've only scratched the surface of its mysteries." The London morning unfolded around us. Shopkeepers raising their shutters, workers hurrying to their daily labors, all unaware of the drama that had played out in the shadows of their city. Yet for those of us who had confronted the darkness, the coming day carried the weight of both resolution and unanswered questions. Chapter 12. Resolutions and Revelations. A week passed before the full implications of the Crimson Pagoda affair came to light. During that time, London returned to its normal rhythms. The newspapers briefly noted the arrest of several foreign agents in Limehouse, and Holmes and I recovered from our exertions with the aid of Mrs. Hudson's excellent cooking and the comfortable familiarity of our Baker Street lodgings. On a crisp autumn morning, we received visitors: Sir William Blackwell, Miss Eliza, and Richard Thornfield. The change in Sir William was remarkable. The stern diplomat I had first encountered had been replaced by a man whose bearing suggested a burden lifted. "Mr. Holmes," he began after we had exchanged pleasantries, "I've come to express my profound gratitude, and to offer an explanation that is long overdue." Holmes waved away the thanks with characteristic impatience. "The gratitude is unnecessary, though I confess a certain curiosity about the explanation." Sir William glanced at his daughter, who nodded encouragingly. "The truth is, Mr. Holmes, that my acquisition of the Crimson Pagoda was not entirely as I represented it to you. Edward Thornfield and I were colleagues in China during the tumultuous period following the Opium Wars. Together we discovered the pagoda hidden in a temple that had been abandoned during the conflict, and recognized its significance immediately," Holmes prompted. "Yes." Edward deciphered enough of the inscriptions to realize it contained diplomatic secrets, and possibly more. We agreed that it should be protected from those who might use it for ill purpose. Sir William's gaze fell. But we disagreed on how this protection should be ensured. I believed it belonged under British protection. He felt it should be returned to responsible Chinese authorities. So you took matters into your own hands, I suggested. I arranged for the pagoda to be transferred to England with other diplomatic materials. Edward protested, but eventually appeared to accept my decision. I didn't realize he had been playing a longer game, preparing his son to one day recover what he considered a cultural treasure wrongfully taken. Holmes steepled his fingers beneath his chin. Hence young Mr. Thornfield's interest in your daughter. Initially, at least. Richard Thornfield flushed but met Holmes's gaze directly. My father told me the story of the pagoda when I came of age. He asked me to find a way to return it to China honorably, without causing diplomatic incident. When I met Eliza at Lady Harrington's, I had no idea of her connection to Sir William. But when you discovered it, Holmes observed, you saw an opportunity. Yes, Thornfield admitted. Though, I swear to you, my feelings for Eliza quickly became genuine. When I learned her father possessed the pagoda, I was torn between my promise to my father and my growing attachment to her. So you confided in her, I said. He told me everything, Eliza confirmed, placing her hand over Thornfield's. About his father, the pagoda, its significance. When I confronted my father with this knowledge, he refused to consider returning it, citing national security and his duty to the crown. Which is when you decided to take action yourselves, Holmes concluded. A plan that might have succeeded had Moriarty not been monitoring the situation. But how did Moriarty become involved at all, I asked, the question that had been troubling me since the warehouse confrontation. Sir William sighed heavily. That responsibility lies with me as well. Years ago, when the Foreign Office was developing new encryption methods, Professor Moriarty was briefly engaged as a consultant. During that period, he learned of the pagoda's existence, though not its location. When he was dismissed due to concerns about his character, I thought the matter closed. But Moriarty never forgets valuable information, Holmes said. When he learned through his network that Edward Thornfield had returned to Hong Kong and his son was courting Miss Blackwell, he deduced the connection.